My name is Iris Hall, and at 34 I learned the truth about the night my grandmother died. I drove 5 hours to get here. 5 hours of open highway through Southern Virginia with Nana Evelyn's brass drafting compass sitting in the passenger seat like a quiet witness. The thing weighed almost nothing. It carried everything. My mother was turning 65. She was throwing herself a garden party at the old house. The one with the long gravel driveway I used to race my sister down when we were kids. Ruth Calloway, my grandmother's oldest friend, had called me 3 weeks earlier. Her voice was careful. Your grandmother would have wanted you there for this. And I have something for you, Iris, when the moment's right. I hadn't been home in 7 years. 7 years of silence. 7 years of my family telling this town I was the kind of woman who takes advantage of a dying old lady and vanishes when there's nothing left. I pulled up that driveway at 4 in the afternoon. 30 Ohm guests on the back lawn. White tablecloths. Diane Holt holding court with a glass of Pog Grigio. My sister Brooke laughing too loud near the hydrangeas. My father Tom nodding along to whatever someone's husband was saying about the county fair. I stepped out of the car. Not one of them looked up, but what my mother had kept from me for 7 years was waiting at that party. And so was the only person still willing to say it out loud. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people set quiet boundaries that change everything. Here, dignity always outlasts cruelty, and Thetruth has a way of arriving exactly on time. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I walked across the lawn with my hands loose at my sides. A few guests glanced over. One woman, I think she worked at the bank, offered a polite smile, the kind you give someone you can't quite place. Diane saw me first. She was mid-sentence, gesturing with that wine glass like a conductor's baton. Her eyes found mine, held for exactly 1 second, then moved back to her audience. She didn't stop talking. She didn't say hello. She adjusted her silk scarf and laughed at something a guest said as if I hadn't driven 300 miles to stand in her yard. Brooke noticed next. My sister was 36 now, wearing a cream linen dress and a thin gold necklace I'd never seen before. She looked good. She looked like she'd been practicing looking good for a long time. Her smile thinned when she saw me, the way paper thins when you fold it too many times. Oh, a pause. Then you came. 2 words. No hug, no surprise, no warmth. Just the verbal equivalent of finding a stain on a tablecloth. Tom, my father, stood near the grill with Hal Brennan, the contractor everybody in town seemed to know. Dad caught my eye across the lawn and gave me this nod. Short, tight, like he was acknowledging a neighbor he owed money to. Then he turned back to Hal and kept talking. Aunt Carol appeared out of nowhere. She kissed both my cheeks, held my shoulders at arm's length, and said loud enough for the table behind her to hear. Bless her heart, she actually showed up. I'd been home for 45 seconds. Nobody asked me where I'd been. Nobody asked me what I did for a living. Nobody asked me anything at all. It happened near the dessert table. I'd picked up a plate of lemon bars because standing near food gives you something to do with your hands when nobody talks to you. And I was working on my second one when Brooke walked over with 2 women I didn't recognize. Iris, you remember Karen and Dawn from the Junior League? I didn't. I smiled anyway. Nice to see you both. Karen tilted her head. And what are you up to these days? Before I could open my mouth, Brooke cut in. Her voice was bright, cheerful. The tone of someone reading a punchline they'd rehearsed. Still broke, still alone, still pointless. She said it like it was a joke. She even laughed afterward, a short performative exhale. And Karen and Dawn did that thing where they half smiled because they didn't know what else to do. Across the lawn, my mother heard it. Diane lifted her glass off Pogriggio and she laughed into her wine. The afternoon light caught the glass. The sound carried. Still broke, still alone, still pointless. I sat down the lemon bar. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clench my jaw. I had practiced 7 years of not reacting to things that were designed to make me react. And if there is one skill I have perfected, it is standing still while someone tries to knock me over. It's good to see you, too, Brooke, I said. She blinked. That wasn't the script. She'd expected tiercer anger or a stammered defense, something she could carry to the next circle of guests like a trophy. Instead, she got a woman holding a plate of lemon bars with steady hands and a face that gave her nothing. I didn't flinch. Flinching was what they were waiting for. Here is what the town of Mill Haven, Virginia, believed about me. They believed I had swooped back into my grandmother's life during her last months, cozied up to her while she was confused and frail, and then disappeared the night she died without so much as attending the funeral reception. They believed I had taken something. Nobody could say exactly what and left my mother to clean up the mess. They believed Diane was the devoted daughter, the one who held Evelyn's hand at the end, the one who arranged the lees on the casket and wrote the obituary and sat in the front pew looking like grief made elegant. They believed all of this because my Aunt Carol had spent 7 years telling them so. Carol was 60 now, and she'd built her social life the way some women build Pinterest boards, one carefully curated story at a time. She ran the gossip loop in Mill Haven like a regional franchise. She decided who was sympathetic and who was selfish. And once Carol made the call, the town followed. She had decided I was selfish. I moved through the party like someone visiting an exhibit about their own disappearance. Poor Diane, I heard a neighbor whisper. After everything with that girl, a woman near the roses gave me a look that was half curiosity, half pity, the way you might glance at a stray dog that wandered into a nice restaurant. I carried every glance like a small stone in my pocket. Each one weighed almost nothing. Together, they were heavy enough to drown in. But here's what Carol and Diane and every whispering guest at that party didn't know. I hadn't left because I wanted to. I'd left because my mother told me a lie so clean and so cruel. It took 7 years and 1 letter to undo. 7 years earlier, I was 27 and working my first real engineering job in Roanoke when Nana Evelyn got sick. Pancreatic stage 3. The doctors gave her 4 to 8 months. I came home immediately. I cooked for her. I drove her to chemo in Lynchburg, 45 minutes each way, 3 times a week. I read to her from the drafting manuals she loved, old ones from the 50s with pencil notes in the margins, diagrams she'd drawn herself when women weren't supposed to know how load-bearing walls worked. I slept on the daybed in her study for 3 months. Diane came by on Sundays. Brooke sent flowers once. Tom mowed the lawn. On a Tuesday in October, Nana had a bad night. I stayed up with her until 2 in the morning, then fell asleep in the chair beside her bed. At 6:00 a.m., my mother called, "Go home, Iris, get some rest. I'm coming over to sit with her." So I drove back to the main house. I showered. I lay down for 2 hours. When I woke up and called the house phone, Diane answered on the first ring. "She's gone. She passed about an hour ago." I couldn't speak. It was peaceful, my mother said. Her voice was flat and smooth, like a lake with something underneath it, just family at the end. I drove back. I ran up the porch steps. I tried to go into the bedroom, and Diane stepped into the doorway blocking it. She looked at me the way you look at a dog that's tracked mud into the house. "She didn't want you there, Iris." I was protecting her. 5 words and a name. That sentence lived inside me for 7 years like a bone that never set right. Nana Evelyn had been a draftswoman. Not officially. Women in 1962 didn't get that title. She worked for a civil engineering firm in Richmond as a clerical assistant, which meant she redrew half their blueprints and never saw her name on a single one. She told me about it the way other grandmothers told fairy tales with patience, a little humor, and the quiet understanding that the ending wasn't fair. When I was 12, she gave me her brass drafting compass. It was heavy for its size, warm-colored with a hinge that moved like butter. She kept it in a leather case lined with green felt. "This is the only tool that ever had my initials on it," she said, turning it so I could see the tiny A scratched into the base. "I want you to put yours next to mine." I never did. It felt too sacred to mark. The compass became the thing I reached for when the world tilted. Through college, through my first job. Through the night, I packed a bag and left Mill Haven with nothing but my car and a box of books. The compass sat in whatever drawer or pocket or glove compartment was closest. It was the size off a house key. It grounded me the way a keel grounds a boat. Brooke had wanted it. I remember her face the day Nana handed it to me. 12 and 14, standing in Nana's study, and Brooke's expression went sharp and still, the look of someone doing math they didn't like the answer to. She never said anything. She didn't have to. The ledger started that afternoon. Nana told me something else that year, sitting on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and a pencil behind her ear. You don't owe them the proof, Iris. I was 12. I didn't understand. I do now. Back at the party, I leaned against the porch railing and watched the lawn like a woman who had nowhere better to be. The truth, which nobody at this party was going to hear from me, was that I had spent the last 6 years building a structural engineering firm called Hall and Ridge out of a 2-room office in Charlottesville. We started with residential inspections, then small restorations. Then 18 months ago, we won the contract for the Mill Haven River Mill project, the biggest historic renovation in the county's history. $3.02 $2 million, $14 months of work. The project this entire town had been buzzing about for a year, my company, my designs, my name on the contract. But here at this party, I was still the girl who took advantage of her dying grandmother and vanished. I let them think that Nana had taught me why. When we'd drive past the Mercedes dealership on Route 29, she'd slow the car a little, not to look exactly, but to let the sunlight hit the hoods. She'd say, "You'll have one someday, Iris, and when you do, you won't drive it here to show them. You'll drive it because you earned the quiet." I was earning the quiet right now. The midnight blue sedan I'd parked at the bottom of the long gravel driveway behind the catering van half, hidden by the old magnolia tree, was a car that cost more than my mother's annual fundraising total for the Millhaven Community Foundation. Nobody had noticed it yet. Nobody was looking. That was fine. I hadn't come back for the car. I hadn't come back to prove anything. I'd come because Ruth had asked, and because the woman who raised me deserved at least one person at this party who remembered her honestly. Ruth Calloway found me on the porch at 5:15, right when the afternoon light started going gold. She was 86 years old, 52, and she walked like a woman who had never once been in a hurry and never once been late. Her white hair was pinned up and she wore a navy cardigan with brass buttons that looked older than I was. She carried a small clutch purse, the kind women her age hold with both hands close to the body like it contained something that mattered. "There you are," she said, and she hugged me, really hugged me, arms around my shoulders, her hand on the back of my head, holding me the way Nana used to hold me when I was small. Nobody else at that party had touched me. "I'm glad you came," she said, pulling back to study my face with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You look like her, Yauno, more every year." "Thank you for calling me Ruth," she patted my arm. "Your grandmother would have wanted you here." Then she looked out at the party, at Diane holding court by the hydrangeas, at Brooke refilling wine glasses with the attentive performance of a daughter who needed witnesses. And something crossed her face, a tightening, the look of a woman who had kept a promise and was getting tired of waiting. "I have something for you," she said quietly, "when the moment's right." She squeezed my hand once firm, then walked back toward the lawn. I watched her go. She stopped near the dessert table and picked up a plate as if nothing had happened. 86 and still the best poker face in Millhaven. Whatever Ruth was holding, it had waited 7 years. It could wait a little longer, but I had a feeling it wouldn't have to. The party settled into its rhythm after 6:00. Someone plugged in string lights. A playlist of soft jazz drifted from a speaker near the back door. Diane moved between clusters of guests like a hostess at a gallery opening, touching elbows, laughing in that practiced way, making sure everyone's glass was full and everyone's impression was managed. I sat at a table near the fence with a glass of water and watched my family perform. Brooke was telling a group about the Millhaven River Mill restoration, the project she kept calling our town's crown jewel. She used words like revitalization and heritage preservation, and I watched the guests nod along, impressed. Brooke's husband, Chad, had apparently joined the advisory committee. Diane had hosted 2 fundraising luncheons for it. Tom had donated lumber from his hardware store. The hall name was all over that project, just not the right hall. I took a sip of water and said nothing. There's a particular kind of discipline in listening to people take credit for your work while you hold your glass steady and let them finish. I'd been practicing it for years. I was very good at it. A woman named Donna. I recognized her from the school board, leaned over to me. "And what do you do, sweetheart?" Diane materialized beside me before I could answer. She put her hand on my shoulder, the first time she'd touched me all evening, and said with a soft, careful smile, "Iris is still finding her path. We're all rooting for her." The table offered sympathetic nods. Donna patted my arm. Diane floated away, still finding her path. I'd had my path since I was 28. I'd paved it myself. If you've ever walked back into a room that decided long ago who you were and decided to stay calm anyway, you already understand this story. Stay with me. The quietest part is still coming. And if this is landing, take a second to subscribe. The questions kept coming over the next hour, the way questions do at parties in small towns where everyone has an opinion and nobody has boundaries. Each time, someone in my family answered for me. Hal Brennan asked what field I was in. Tom jumped in. "She's been doing some work in the city. Office stuff." He said it the way you'd describe a hobby you didn't take seriously. Carol's friend Peggy asked if I was married. Carol herself answered that one loud enough for the next table. Our Iris is the independent type. And when the pastor's wife, a kind woman named Linda, asked gently if I'd found someone, Brooke appeared with a fresh glass of wine and said, "Some people are better solo, Linda. Trust me." Each answer was a small wall built around me. Not brick, something softer, cotton and condescension. The kind of walls that don't look like walls until you realize you can't move. I let them build. Every wall they put up was one more thing they'd have to explain later. I kept my face pleasant. I asked about other people's children. I complimented the caterer's shrimp. I said, "How nice and wonderful and congratulations," until the words lost all meaning, the way a song loses melody when you play it on repeat. At 7:15, I excused myself and walked inside to use the bathroom. On the way through the hall, I passed the closed door to Nana's study. The room where she'd taught me to read blueprints, where the compass had lived in its leather case on the second shelf. The door was shut. A coat rack stood in front of it like a sentry. I touched the knob. It was cold. I didn't turn it. Not yet. I turned it. The study was gone, not remodeled, erased. Where Nana's drafting table had stood for 30 years, there was now a treadmill. Her bookshelves, packed with engineering manuals, pencil cups, framed photos off bridges she'd admired, had been replaced by a white storage unit holding yoga mats and resistance bands. I spotted 2 cardboard boxes shoved into the closet labeled Evelyn Misquet in Deanne's handwriting. 30 years of draftsmanship, boxed and shelved like old tax returns. The green felt-lined case where the compass used to sit was nowhere. The smell of cedar and old paper was gone. It smelled like lavender air freshener now. Diane had turned it into a home gym. I stood in the doorway for 10 seconds and let the room tell me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly my grandmother had been replaced. Evelyn Hall, who had drawn load calculations in the margins of library books and sketched bridge trusses on napkins, who had fought for every inch of professional respect in an era that gave women none. Her workspace had been converted into a room for Diane's Peloton schedule. My hand went to the compass in my jacket pocket. The brass was warm from my body heat. I pressed my thumb against the hinge where the E initials were scratched and felt my anger rise. Not a flood, just a slow, clean pressure like water behind a dam. I let it settle. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not here, not now. The compass was proof she had existed. The room was proof they wanted her forgotten. I closed the door. I walked back down the hall with my shoulders straight and my face blank. Nobody noticed I'd been gone. Nobody noticed anything about me, which, as it turned out, was exactly the advantage I needed. I sat back down at my table. Ruth caught my eye across the lawn and gave the smallest nod. Almost time. My father found me alone near the drink station at 7:30. The sun was low now. The kind of golden hour that makes everything look warmer than it is. Tom Holt was 66. He had the build of a man who'd spent 40 years lifting lumber and the posture of a man who'd spent the same 40 years trying not to be noticed. He poured himself a lemonade and stood next to me without looking at me directly. The way you might stand near a painting you weren't sure you were allowed to touch. Long drive, he said. 5 hours roads clear mostly. We stood in silence. The jazz playlist moved to something with a trumpet across the lawn. Deanne was organizing a group photo. Your grandmother, Tom started. He stared at his lemonade. She would have liked you being here. Something cracked open behind his voice. Thin, fragile, the sound a branch makes before it falls. I waited. I wanted him to say more. I wanted him to say he was sorry or they'd known or that he should have called. Tom. Diane's voice cut across the lawn like a bell. Get over here for the photo. Bring your glass. He flinched. He actually flinched. A micro movement. A twitch of the jaw that lasted less than a second. Then he straightened his shoulders, picked up his glass, and walked toward the photo group without finishing his sentence. That was my father. He'd been starting sentences about my grandmother for 7 years and never finishing them. He had been walking away from almost truths for so long that the walking had become the truth. I watched him take his place beside Diane. She put her arm around him. He smiled for the camera. The portrait of a family with no missing pieces, except the piece was me. 800. The sky was lavender. Somebody lit the citronella candles and the smoke curled through the air like punctuation. Brooke had had 3 glasses of wine by now, and her performance was getting sloppy. The careful linen dress composure from earlier had loosened into something sharper, the way a polished floor gets slippery when it's wet. She stood in the middle of a circle of guests, 6 or 7 women, Karen and Dawn among them, and raised her glass. I want to say something about Mom. The circle quieted. A few guests turned. 65 years of being the backbone of this family. 65 years of holding us together, especially after we lost Nana. Brooke's voice caught, perfectly timed, just enough tremor. Mom was the one who carried us, the one who stayed. She looked directly at me. Every woman in that circle followed her gaze. Some of us stayed and some of us didn't. A beat, a smile that wasn't. But tonight isn't about what's missing. Tonight is about what's here. Scattered applause. Carol dabbed her eye. Diane pressed a hand to her chest and mouthed, "Thank you." I sat still. I held my water glass with both hands and felt the condensation drip between my fingers. The message was clear. I was the absence. I was the failure of loyalty. I was the daughter who left while Diane stayed and held everything together. 30 guests heard it. 30 guests accepted it. The narrative had been reinforced for 7 years, and Brooke had just shellacked it in front of everyone who mattered. Ruth was watching from the far end of the lawn. She sat down her plate slowly. She looked at me with an expression I could read from 30 FT away. Now Ruth found me by the fence 5 minutes later. The party noise was behind us. The sky was going dark. She opened her clutch purse, the navy one she'd been holding with both hands all evening, and pulled out an envelope. Yellowed, soft at the corners, the way paper gets when it's been handled carefully and often. Nana Evelyn's handwriting on the front, blue ink, firm strokes for Iris when she's ready. She gave this to me the week before she died, Ruth said. Her voice was steady. She knew Iris. She knew what Diane was doing. I took the envelope. It weighed nothing. It weighed everything. Your grandmother asked for you. Ruth said every day that last week, every single day. She kept saying, "Where is Iris? Tell Iris to come." And your mother told her you didn't want to be there. Told her you were too busy. Told her you'd said it was too hard to watch. I stopped breathing. And Diane told you the opposite, didn't she? Ruth said gently, that your grandmother didn't want to see you. I couldn't speak. I nodded. She lied to both of you. She kept you apart at the very end, and then she built a story around it. Ruth's jaw tightened. I watched it happen. I was there 3 of those last 5 days. Your grandmother died asking for you, and your mother let her believe you didn't care. I opened the letter. Nana's handwriting, smaller than I remembered, the letters trembling but legible. I read one line, then another, then a third. And the world I'd been living in for 7 years folded in on itself like a paper crane. The last line read, "You don't owe them the proof, just come home free of them." I folded the letter. I put it in my jacket next to the compass. I looked at Ruth. "She's going to give a toast soon," I said. Ruth nodded. "I'll be right there." I walked to the far end of the driveway where the gravel met the road. Nobody followed me. The compass was in my left pocket. The letter was in my right. 7 years of guilt sat between them. 7 years I had believed I abandoned my grandmother. 7 years of 2 a.m. conversations with myself where I replayed that phone call. "Go home, Iris. Get some rest," and hated myself for listening. 7 years off wondering if Nana had called my name at the end and if she'd been disappointed that I wasn't there. She had called my name. She had called it every day. And my mother had answered every call with a lie. So practiced it sounded like mercy. I let that land. I let it settle into my bones the way cold settles into a house when the heat goes out. Slowly everywhere all at once. I didn't cry. Crying would have been easy. I felt something harder than grief and quieter than rage. It was clarity. The kind that comes after you've been lost for years and someone finally hands you the map and says, "You were never on the wrong road. Someone moved the signs." I could have gotten in my car, driven 5 hours back to Charlottesville, and never spoken to any of them again. Nana's letter even gave me permission to do exactly that. Come home free of them. But free didn't mean silent. Free meant choosing what to do with the truth instead of hiding from it. Nana had been a woman who drew straight lines in our world that told her she couldn't hold the pencil. She didn't fight loud. She just showed up with the right answer and let the room catch up. I was her granddaughter. I knew what to do. I walked back toward the party. 9:00. The candles were burning low. Somebody had switched the music from jazz to something softer. Acoustic guitar, the kind of playlist that says, "The evening is winding towards speeches and sentiment." I found a seat near the edge of the main table, close enough to hear, but far enough that nobody felt the need to include me. Diane was telling a story to Linda, the pastor's wife, and 2 women from the garden club. Her voice was warm and rounded, the voice of a woman who had perfected the art of being admired. "Those last days were so peaceful," Diane said. She touched her collarbone. It was just family at the very end. Mom and I holding hands. She squeezed my fingers right before she went. I'll never forget it. Linda pressed her hand to her heart. What Abel sang. It really was. Diane wiped the corner of her eye with one finger, dry, I noticed. Perfectly dry. I'm just grateful I could be there for her. I sat 12 feet away and heard every word. Every rehearsed, burnished, hollow-out word. A week ago, those words would have made me feel sick with guilt. Now they made me feel something worse. Certain that Diane had told this story so many times she believed it. Certain that the version of events she'd built was load-bearing. Take it out and everything above it would fall. Certain that in a few minutes when she stood up to give her birthday toast in front of 30 guests who thought she was the devoted daughter, the woman who held Evelyn's hand at the end, she would say it again. And this time Ruth would be listening. This time so would I, with the letter in my pocket and the truth sitting where it had always belonged. I found Ruth at the side of the lawn. She was sitting in a folding chair with her purse on her lap, and the kind off patience that only comes from being old enough to know that most things arrive when they're supposed to. She's going to say it again. I told her during the toast. The peaceful ending. Just family, the whole story. Ruth looked at me. She's been saying it for 7 years, and if I say something, if I stand up and call it a lie, they'll say I'm the bitter daughter who came back to ruin a birthday party. They might. But if you're there, if you tell them what you saw, I'll tell them the truth. Ruth said it simply the way you'd say the sky is blue. I was there, Iris. I watched your grandmother ask for you until she couldn't ask anymore. I can tell every person at this party exactly what happened. She paused, but only if you want me to. I thought about Nana's letter. You don't owe them the proof, just come home free of them. Here was the thing about that line. Nana had written it for a granddaughter who didn't know the truth yet. A granddaughter who still believed she'd been the one to fail. Now I knew better, and freedom, real freedom, wasn't walking away from a lie. It was standing in the same room as the liar and letting the truth breathe. I want them to hear it. I said. Ruth squeezed my hand. Then they will. I walked back toward the main lawn. The magnolia at the bottom of the driveway was backlit by the porch light, and beyond it, parked in the glow, was my car. Nobody had noticed it yet. They would. There's a moment in every quiet person's life when staying silent stops being strength and starts being permission. I just reached mine. If you've reached yours too, comment truth below and let's keep going. 9:15. The speeches were coming. You could feel it the way you feel a storm, a shift in the air, a gathering. Diane had gone inside to freshen up. Brooke was arranging the cake table. Tom was fiddling with the speaker. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the front of the house. The whole property sat on 2 acres, most of it behind the house. But the front, that part that faced the road, was all driveway. 160 ft of pale gravel lined with boxwoods ending at the street in a wide turnout. It was the kind of driveway that announced you before you arrived. A few guests had drifted to the front. Some were smoking. A couple was looking at the sky, pointing out early stars. Someone's teenager was sitting on the stone wall, scrolling her phone. My car sat at the far end, just past the magnolia in the pool of light from the porch lamp. A midnight blue Mercedes S-Class sedan. Current year Virginia plates, the kind of car that doesn't shout. It just waits for you to look. I hadn't parked it there for drama. I'd parked it there because it was the only open spot when I arrived. But now, in the evening light with 30 guests 20 ft away and the string lights reflecting off the hood, it looked like an answer to a question nobody had thought to ask. Hal Brennan was the first to notice. He'd been standing near the boxwoods with a beer talking to Tom's neighbor when he stopped mid-sentence and tilted his head. "Who's S-Class?" he said. He said it the way contractors notice cars, appreciating the machine, doing the math. Nobody answered. I was standing 10 ft away, keys in my hand, the brass compass pressing warm against my thigh. 3 things happened in the next 60 seconds. First, Hal walked closer. He circled the car the way a man who builds things circles something built well. Slow, respectful, counting the details. He crouched near the rear quarter panel and looked at the badging. Then he straightened up and looked at me. "This yours?" "It is." Second, Brooke came around the side of the house with a tray of champagne flutz. She saw the car, saw Hal looking at me, and the tray tilted 6 degrees, the glasses clink-edged. She caught them, but the sound carried, and 5 or 6 guests turned. "Whose car is that?" someone asked. "It's Iris's," Hal said loud enough. Brooke set the tray down on the stone wall. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in 36 years, my sister had no line prepared. Third, Diane came through the front door. She changed into a fresh blouse, ivory, gold buttons, and she was holding her birthday wine glass, the Pog Grigio catching the porch light. She saw the crowd gathering at the end of the driveway. She saw the car. She saw me standing next to it. Her wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. For the first time in 7 years, my mother looked at me directly. Her gaze was sharp, recalculating the way a dealer looks at a hand that's changed. Theglass hovered. The confident smile she'd been wearing all evening flickered once, reset, and came back at half power. "Well," she said. She lowered the glass. Interesting. 30 guests were watching now. The woman they'd been told was broke, alone, and pointless was standing next to a car that cost more than most of their mortgages. I didn't say a word. The car said enough for now. The rewriting started immediately. Brooke was first. She crossed her arms and examined the car from 10 ft away. "The way you examine a painting you suspect is a forgery. Is that leased?" she asked. Casual, loud enough, I looked at her. No, a client's car, no, a boyfriend's. And there it was, the echo, still alone. She couldn't imagine a world where I'd earned this myself because that world would require her to rethink 7 years of assumptions. And Brooke didn't rethink. Brooke doubled down. "It's mine, Brooke. I bought it with money I earned at the company I built." Her face did something complicated. A series of micro-expressions like someone flipping through channels, disbelief, recalculation, resentment, and then a hard landing on the only channel she knew how to broadcast. "Must be nice," she said. "Some of us spent the last 7 years actually being here." Aunt Carol appeared at Brooke's elbow. "A car doesn't make a family, dear," she said to me. She said it sweetly. The way people say sweet things that are meant to cut. Guests were whispering. I could hear fragments. Engineering firm, Charlottesville. How did we not know? Hal was talking to Tom's neighbor about the car's specs, but I could tell from the angle of his head that he was thinking about something else. He kept looking from the car to me and back like he was trying to place a puzzle piece. Diane hadn't moved from the porch. She stood with her wine glass at her side. Not drinking, just holding. The way you hold a weapon you're not sure you'll need. Her eyes tracked every guest who walked toward the car. She was doing math. I could tell she was recalculating who I was and what that meant for the story she'd spent 7 years constructing. Hal Brennan figured it out before anyone else. He was a general contractor. He'd been in the construction business in Mill Haven for 22 years, and he knew every firm, every subcontractor, every architect in a 100-mile radius. He'd been following the Rivermill restoration project the way men in his line of work follow big local jobs with professional envy and genuine curiosity. He walked over to me. His voice was different now. Not the casual beer and party voice, but the voice he probably used on job sites. Holton Ridge, he said. Out of Charlottesville. Yes, that's the firm doing the Rivermill project. $3.2 million contract. 3.4 actually. We picked up the annex last quarter. He stared at me. You're the principal. I'm the founder. Howell looked back at the house at Tom, who was frozen near the porch with his lemonade, at Brooke, whose face had gone white. At Diane, who was gripping her wine glass so hard I could see her knuckles from 20 ft away. Your family's been talking about that project all night, Hal said slowly. Your sister brought it up twice. Your mother mentioned it in every conversation I overheard. They kept calling it the town's crown jewel. It is, and it's yours. It's my firm's. He let out a low whistle. The sound cut through the party chatter. 3 more guests turned to look. Brooke had said some of us spent the last 7 years actually being here. She was right. She'd been here borrowing the prestige of a project she didn't know was mine, telling strangers about the Rivermill as if proximity to the town made it hers. I hadn't come here to claim credit, but credit has a way of finding its owner when the room gets quiet enough. Diane caught my arm in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, out of sight from the lawn. Her grip was firm. Her smile was gone. Up close, I could see the thin lines around her mouth that makeup couldn't reach. The slight tremor in her lower lip that meant she was running calculations at full speed. What are you doing? She said. Low, controlled, but barely. Attending your birthday party, Mom. Don't, she tightened her grip. Don't play this game with me. You show up here after 7 years with that car and that announcement about some company and you think that changes anything. I looked at her hand on my arm. She let go. I didn't announce anything. Howell figured it out. Because you parked it right there, right where everyone could see. I parked where there was a spot. Her jaw worked. I watched the muscles move under her skin like small machinery. She wanted to yell. She couldn't. Not with 30 guests on the other side of the wall. Don't you dare embarrass this family today. She said, this is my birthday. This is my evening. You don't get to waltz in and what exist where people can see me. She flinched. It was quick. A flash of something that looked almost like recognition before it disappeared behind the mask. You always did love an audience, she said. No, I said. You did. We stood in the narrow hallway for 5 seconds. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere outside, Brooke called for everyone to gather for the toast. Diane straightened her blouse. She lifted her chin. She walked past me toward the lawn, and as she brushed by my shoulder, she whispered, You're still the girl who ran. She didn't know about the letter yet. She was about to. Brooke was already standing near the cake table when I came back outside. She had a champagne flute in one hand and the knife for the cake in the other, and she looked like a woman holding on to the last 2 props from a play that was falling apart. The guests were gathering, folding chairs dragged across grass. Somebody dimmed the string lights. The evening had that charged, expectant quality that comes right before speeches at parties. The moment when everyone stops talking and turns toward whoever is about to speak. Brooke saw me. She saw my face. And whatever she read there made her do what Brooke always did when she felt the ground shifting. She doubled down. Everyone, before Mom gives her toast, she raised her glass. Her voice was bright, strained, pitched higher than it needed to be. I just want to remind everyone that tonight is about loyalty, about who shows up year after year, not just when it's convenient. She looked at me. The meaning was a hammer. Some of us chose this family every single day. Some of us didn't. And I think that says everything. Silence, not the comfortable kind. The kind that happens when someone has said something a little too sharp for the occasion and no one knows where to put it. Linda, the pastor's wife, shifted in her chair. Karen stared at her hands. Dawn sipped her champagne too fast. Brooke stood there waiting for applause that didn't come. Ruth was 3 rows back, sitting with her purse on her lap and her eyes on me, steady as a compass needle. The moment held. The string lights swayed. Diane picked up her glass and walked toward the front of the gathering. Toast time. Diane stood in the glow of the string lights with her wine glass raised. She was backlit, golden, composed, 65 years old and in full command of the room, or at least in full command of the performance. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said. Her voice was warm, polished, the voice of a woman who had chaired 100 meetings and never lost a vote. "This family has been through so much. We've lost. We've aggrieved, but we stayed together." She paused. She looked at Brooke, then at Tom, then briefly, dismissively at me. "And I want to raise a glass to my mother, Evelyn, who taught me that family is about who stays, not who leaves." The crowd murmured, glasses lifted. A few people said, "Hear, hear." The letter was in my right pocket. The compass was in my left, both pressed against me like 2 halves of a scale. Nana had written, "Just come home free of them." But Nana had also spent 40 years drawing straight lines in rooms that told her she couldn't hold the pencil. She didn't hide. She showed her work. I could leave, drive away, let the story stand, let Diane own the version, let Brooke keep saying, still broke, still alone, still pointless at every party for the next 20 years. Or I could stand up in this garden full of witnesses and let the truth do what it does. I caught Ruth's eye. She gave me that same small nod. I stood. "I'd like to say something too," I said. My voice was even, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people lean in. Diane's glass trembled once. Diane's smile didn't waver, but her grip on the wine glass shifted. I watched her fingers reposition the way a poker player adjusts their cards when the bet gets raised. "Of course," she said, "gracious, magnanimous." The tone of a woman granting a favor she hadn't been asked for. "Iris, please say a few words." She thought she knew what was coming. A sheepish apology, a prodigal Dottie routine, something she could absorb and redirect the way she redirected everything. I stood in front of 30 people. The string lights hummed. The gravel driveway stretched behind me. Somewhere near the Magnolia, my car gleamed like a fact nobody could explain away. "I want to talk about Nana Evelyn," I said. A ripple of attention. Nana was sacred ground in Mill Haven. She'd been beloved. Everyone here had a memory of her. Her cobbler at the church potluck. Her blueprints tacked to the coffee shop bulletin board. The way she remembered every child's name and every dog's breed. Diane stiffened. This wasn't the script. "Mom, you just said family is about who stays." "I agree." I kept my voice level steady, the same tone I'd use in a client meeting when the numbers were in my favor and the room needed to catch up. "So I want to tell everyone here who stayed with Nana at the end." Diane's smile was still holding, but the infrastructure underneath it was cracking. I could see it in her posture, the slight backward lean, the way her left hand moved to her collarbone, the involuntary swallow. "Iris," she said, a warning soft enough that only I could hear. "Don't," I looked at her. I had never been calmer. "I'm not going to say anything that isn't true. 7 years ago, I said I spent 3 months living in Nana's study. I drove her to chemo in Lynchburg 3 times a week, 45 minutes each way. I cooked her meals. I read to her. I slept on the daybed next to her drafting table. Nobody spoke. Linda's hand went to her mouth. On the last morning, my mother called me and told me to go home and rest. She said she'd sit with Nana, so I left. And while I was sleeping, Nana died. I paused. When I called, my mother told me it was peaceful, just family at the end. I looked at Diane. She was frozen. The wine glass hung at her side like a pendulum that had stopped. Then she told me Nana hadn't wanted me there, that she was protecting Nana from the stress of my presence. And I believed her for 7 years. I turned to the guests. There's someone here tonight who was also there during those last days. Someone who saw what actually happened. Ruth stood. 86 years old, 52, navy cardigan with brass buttons. She didn't rush. She walked to the front of the gathering the way she walked everywhere without hurry, without hesitation. "My name is Ruth Calloway," she said. Her voice was clear as a bell tower. "Evelyn Hall was my closest friend for 53 years. I was there for 5 of her last 7 days, and I need to tell you what I saw." The garden went still. Even the crickets seemed to quiet. Evelyn asked for Iris every single day. I sat in that room and heard her say your name over and over. "Iris, where's Iris? Tell Iris to come." And every time she asked, Diane told her Iris didn't want to come. That Iris said it was too hard to watch. Ruth looked at Diane. That was a lie. You kept a dying woman from the granddaughter she loved. And then you spent 7 years telling this town that Iris was the one who abandoned her. The sound that Diane made was not a word. It was something between a gasp and a denial. A sharp intake of breath followed by a shaking of the head that was too fast to be convincing. That is not Ruth. You don't know what I know exactly what I'm saying." Ruth hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. I was in the room. I heard her say Iris's name. I heard you tell her Iris wouldn't come. I was protecting my mother. Diane's voice cracked upward. She was louder now, louder than she meant Tobe. And the guests who hadn't been watching before were watching now. You don't understand what it was like. She was confused. She was calling for everyone. She didn't know what she was saying. She knew exactly what she was saying. Ruth's voice stayed even. She wrote a letter. I pulled the envelope from my jacket. Yellowed blue ink, for Iris when she's ready. Nana gave this to Ruth before she died. I said she knew what was happening. She knew she was being kept from me and she wanted me to know the truth. I didn't read the whole letter. I read one line, the one that mattered. You don't owe them the proof. Just come home free of them. Diane's hand trembled. Slowly, like a woman putting down something she'd been carrying for a long time, she lowered her wine glass to the table. It made a small sound against the wood, the last glass she'd set down that evening. "You're ruining my birthday." Her voice broke. It was wet and ragged. The sound of a person whose mask has slipped and who is furious at the mask for slipping. "After everything I did for this family, you come back and you do this. You ruin everything." She didn't say sorry. She didn't take it back. She collapsed into blame the way a building falls straight down into its own foundation. The party came apart at the seams. Not all at once. Slowly, the way a room empties when nobody wants to be the first to leave, but nobody wants to stay. Karen stood up and said something about needing to relieve the babysitter. Dawn followed 30 seconds later with a vague mention of an early morning. Peggy touched Carol's arm, whispered something, and walked toward the driveway without looking back. Carol herself stood perfectly still, mouth slightly open, the machinery of her gossip engine grinding to a halt for what might have been the first time in 20 years. She had built her social currency on Diane's version. The version had just been recalled. The pastor's wife, Linda, sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the ground. The pastor himself had his hand on her shoulder, and he looked like a man who just realized he'd been endorsing a story he never should have believed. Brooke was crying, actually crying. Not the rehearsed tears from the toast earlier, but the ugly, uncontrolled kind, the crying of a woman who'd organized her entire identity around being the daughter who stayed and was now watching that framework buckle. And Tom, my father, he stood at the edge of the lawn with his lemonade glass, and Hugh'd not look at me. He stared at the grass, at his shoes, at a spot on the ground where nothing was happening, because looking at me would have meant acknowledging that he had known maybe not everything, but enough, and he had chosen silence for 7 years. I stood in the middle of it all and felt the evening settle. Brooke had called me still broke, still alone, still pointless. I was still here, still standing, still hers Nana's. I meant Nana's. I could have said more. I could have told every person on that Lawn Thath Rivermill project, the crown jewel, the heritage restoration, the thing my family had been named dropping all night, was contracted to my firm, that the Hall name on the project was mine, not theirs. that the prestige they'd been borrowing had an owner and she was standing right here. I could have pulled the contract, redirected the work, made a phone call on Monday that would have unraveled every ribbon-cutting photo opportunity Diane had been planning. I didn't. I reached into my jacket pocket and wrapped my hand around the brass compass. The metal was warm. The hinge was smooth. The A initials pressed into my palm like a handshake from someone who wasn't here anymore, but whose opinion was the only one that mattered. I didn't come here to take anything from anyone. I said my voice was the quietest it had been all night. I came because Ruth asked me to, and because the woman who raised me deserved at least one person at this party who remembered her honestly. I looked at Diane, at Brooke, at Tom. I'm not going to stand here and list what I've built. You can look it up if you want or don't. It doesn't change anything. I slipped the letter back into my pocket next to the compass. What changes is the truth. That's all I came to bring home. I turned. I walked down the gravel driveway. The sound of my shoes on the stones was the loudest thing in the yard. Nobody followed me. Nobody called my name. And for the first time in 7 years, that silence belonged to me. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires at 9:47. The rear view mirror showed the house getting smaller. String lights, white tablecloths, the silhouette of guests filtering toward their cars. The party was over. Everyone knew it. I drove 5 hours home with the windows down and the compass on the passenger seat where it had written that morning. The letter sat in my jacket pocket. I didn't play music. I didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, the math of Millhaven recalculated. Ruth told me later in a phone call from her kitchen. Diane had been asked to step down from the Millhaven Community Foundation Board. Not fired, asked. The kind of asking that comes with lowered voices and phrases like perhaps it's best for everyone. She'd chaired it for 11 years. The board replaced her in a single vote. Aunt Carol went quiet. For the first time in 2 decades, her commentary on the Holt family dried up because the story she'd been distributing had been publicly amended in front of every person who mattered. Brooke sent me a text 3 weeks later. It said, "I hope you're happy." No apology, no admission, no curiosity about whether the things Ruth had said were true. Just 4 words aimed at making her discomfort my fault. I didn't reply. Tom never called. I hadn't expected him to. Some men spend their whole lives choosing peace over truth, and by the time they realize the peace was never real, the phone feels too heavy to pick up. The Rivermill project continued on schedule. My firm hit every milestone. The town got Itcheridge restoration, and nobody on my team ever knew their principal had grown up 3 miles from the site. That was my business. The work spoke for itself. Ruth and I talked every Sunday at 2. She'd tell me about her garden and I'd tell her about load calculations, and neither of us mentioned the party unless the other one brought it up first. She was 86. She'd earned the right to talk about whatever she wanted. Once she said, "Your grandmother would be proud of you, not for the company or the car, for the standing still." I kept that sentence the way I kept the compass. Close, quiet mine. On a Monday in October, 7 years and 1 month after I'd left Millhaven, I cleared a space on my drafting desk at the office in Charlottesville. I set the brass compass there, standing upright in a small wooden block my shop foreman had carved for it. A and the ghost of a granddaughter's thumbprint on the hinge. The letter I kept in the top drawer. Some mornings I opened it. Most mornings I didn't need to. The words had moved from the paper into my bones. You don't owe them the proof. I worked. I designed. I built things that would outlast the people who doubted I could hold the pencil. Deanne had my number. She never used it. Brooke had my email. She used it once to ask if I'd contribute to a family photo album for Tom's birthday. I declined. The terms were mine now. If they ever wanted to talk, really talk with honesty and no audience. The door was unlocked, but I was done walking through theirs. Nana had said to come home free of them. I'd done something better. I'd come home, told the truth, and driven away free of the version of myself they'd built without me. That was what I'd driven home. The truth. And it cost me nothing but 7 years of believing a lie. It turns out the most expensive thing I ever brought home wasn't parked in the driveway. It was a yellowed envelope and the 60-year-old woman brave enough to hand it to me. That's my story. 7 years of silence, 1 letter, and a truth that arrived right on time. If Somyeon rewrote your story, too, take this as your sign to live free of it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.